This is the Season 2 Preservation Evoker Guide for Mythic Plus. My name is Bowser the Healer. I have a lot of experience on this class. I hit 3k last season, mostly pugging, but I also have plenty of experience with group play as well. This guide is going to be mostly focused to Mythic Plus, so if you're looking for raiding tips, honestly, I do recommend checking out someone who's more raid oriented in their build. However, do note that you're going to learn a lot about the class here, so this might still prove to be very useful. And before we get into the table of contents, if you are a beginner, I want you to know that I do have a more beginner-focused guide that will be coming, but there is a beginner's build here, and I will brush up on a few beginner's tips and tricks. There is a table of contents down below. Everything should be labeled. And of course, if you like this kind of content, hey, get subscribed. It would mean the world to me. I absolutely love making healer content. Season 1 proved to me that I love this content creation thing, and so I'll be keeping up with it for all of Season 2 as well. So if you want to see more, hit that button. Now, before we get into the actual stats and guide portion, I first want to talk about a few terms you're going to hear me say. GCD means global cooldown. Global cooldown is that time period where you're locked out of using a spell. So you'll see when I cast Living Flame, all of my spells spin for a moment. That's just the cooldown timer before you can act again. It's pretty noteworthy on this move with no cast time. As you can see, you have to wait a moment before casting, which means OGCD are moves that can be used regardless of the GCD. A good example of this is time dilation, this button here. I can be in the middle of pressing another button and I can use that move. GCD and OGCD. You'll typically hear me talk about GCD as a unit of measurement, or like a half GCD, moves like hover, which allow you to act earlier than a GCD after using them. That's the biggest one. The other term you're going to hear me say a lot is combo. I don't want to get anyone confused. I'm not about to start citing Tekken 7 notation or anything like that, but do note that a combo refers to any sort of interaction with healing involving echo or a few other buttons that like interact with each other. I know that can sound a bit spooky, but trust me, it's not too scary with this class, but I will be referring to it a lot. So if you hear me talking about combos a whole lot, don't fret, you'll learn all about them. Okay, on screen, I'll have our stat weights. Just to simplify what you're looking at, we want haste quite a bit. Haste until about 20%, and then crit and verse will provide a lot of stat value to you. Critical I like more because we do have interactions with critical in our kit and in our talent tree, and versatility is nice again for the straight damage output increase, and of course the resistance increase it provides as well. Now, mastery is our lowest priority stat. The reason is that's more for raid than it is for Mythic Plus, and that it doesn't contribute to damage in any way, and we don't need that extra healing benefit from mastery in a 5-player scenario. In raid, the mastery stat goes a lot further in helping heal lots of players more, so it ends up incredibly beneficial. If you're a raider with a lot of mastery and you end up in preservation for Mythic Plus, just know it's not the end of the world. You can clear 20s with a high mastery. It truly isn't that big of a deal. And on the flip side, Mythic Plus players hold on to mastery pieces. They're not bad. You might end up using them for raid if your stat weights aren't good enough. While for most of Heroic, you're likely going to be able to get away with the wrong stat weights, I do know that in Mythic, the difficulty tends to be high enough that you don't want to be throwing in the healing side of things, but it all depends on composition. Keep some mastery pieces around. Thank me later. Okay, Essence is our special little resource. We have 5 of them, 6 if we talent into it, and it's used for 3 moves in particular. We have Disintegrate, Emerald Blossom, and Echo. Emerald Blossom I use the least in this build, but it's a fire and forget heal that detonates after a short moment. Healing 3 targets, it can heal up to 5. Echo is our main combo tool. It'll replicate a heal on a target, so if I heal myself, the Echo target will also receive a heal. And Disintegrate is a single target spell that slows the target and does pretty decent damage, as well as restoring our mana because of the way we're talented. Essence, however, does thankfully track correctly, so you will get a cooldown based on how long it is until you can cast another Essence spell based on Essence recharge. So if you get confused about the special little dots down here, don't worry, the cooldown themselves will tell you exactly how long it is until you can use that spell again. Okay, we're gonna go over every single button on my bar here. This is for anyone who is truly new to the class that just wants to hear what I have to say. I'll mention tier set, I'll mention certain combo opportunities, little tips and tricks on all of the buttons. I'm going to start with damage, then healing, and then emergency cooldowns and everything else. Starting with the damage department is also the healing department, and that's Living Flame. It's our basic heal and our basic damage depending on the target that we hit. we will either heal them or we will do damage to them. It does slightly more as a heal than it does as a damaging move, which was a patch that happened in Season 1. However, it's very useful as a damaging spell and is honestly the button you're pressing when you've used all of your other damaging moves. Disintegrate, as I said earlier, costs essence and it restores our mana based on the way we're talented, and it's good damage. You're going to want to use this move, but not over Living Flame, as Living Flame does do more damage in the long run. They're very close though, so use Disintegrate every once in a while to get your mana back up, or maybe if you need to slow a target, it's great for slowing a target, but Living Flame is your main single target move. But between the two of them, you get a lot done. Azure Strike is a cleave that hits 2 targets, or 3 if you use Protracted Talons, the talent, and you can move while casting. It's mana positive, however, it is important to note that it's not worth it in the damage department over Living Flame unless you're taking Protracted Talons, in which case in 3 targets or more, Protracted Talons is more damage. In less than 3 targets, Living Flame is better. But if you don't take the talent at all, you're just going to be casting Living Flame in AoE situations anyway, because it's still worth it. So your job is to target a priority target and lower their health bar down. Sometimes that's just the highest health target in a pack. Sometimes that's going to be something that you need to have die quicker. You do a lot of priority target damage as Evoker. However, you do have some great AoE, and one of the 2 great AoE buttons is Fire Breath. This is a move that can be charged up and has a cone that you must aim. It does the same amount of damage no matter how hard you charge it, but you need to remember the further you charge it, the more potent it becomes up front with less of a damage over time effect. So if you use level 1, you'll do some damage up front and then the rest of the damage over a 24-second period. And then each level will stagger that number and change the weight essentially, right? How much more front-loaded or back-loaded is it? Now, it does double up as a heal with the way we talent, so I highly recommend using level 1 and level 2 charge in most scenarios. However, the good rule of thumb is charge it up based on how long the pack will live. If you think that the pack's gonna die soon, charge it up all the way to level 3 or level 4 and get the most value out of it. If it's the start of a pack, you can let Flame Breath level 1 or level 2 just fine, and you should get a decent amount of healing out of it as well as its fantastic damage. Our other big damaging move is Deep Breath, which unless you talent into Terror of the Skies and making it a stun, in which case you want to use it more like a crowd control button, it's a great AoE damage button. It has a minimum distance, but it's super powerful and you just have a nice little 2-minute. You can use it to charge into a pack, but if you don't want to, you can walk into a pack and dash out, dealing damage to everyone as you leave. Just keep it on cooldown, don't use it if it's too dangerous, and honestly, there's a lot you can get done with this button. Let's talk about healing. I am going to revisit Living Flame real quick. As a heal or as a damaging spell, it has a chance to trigger an Essence Burst, which gives you a free cast of any of your Essence moves. This is incredibly useful, and something like an Echo into a Living Flame is an incredible amount of healing. However, this is your last resort heal or your economy heal. If you don't want to be spending a bigger cooldown, Living Flame is definitely the way to go. Fire Breath is also a heal, as I mentioned earlier, based on Life Giver's Flame. It does a lot of healing, so set a group on fire and then forget about it. It'll be doing its job in the background. But as for right and proper heals, we have Reversion. You have 2 charges and it recharges every 7 to 8 seconds depending on your haste, but this is a nice little heal over time effect that can be doubled up with an Echo, and with Golden Hour will instantly heal 15% of damage recently taken in the last 5 seconds. This makes it a fantastic spot heal, and it's really funny on these training dummies because you'll get a goofy number like 84 million because they're always taking damage. Echo Reversion is one of the most powerful combos in the game, and remember that, it's one of your best spot heals. You'll thank me later when we get to combos. Spirit Bloom is a heal that works on 1 player or up to 4 players when charged, and it doesn't do more healing when charged, it simply heals more targets. However, it is an incredibly chunky, incredibly large heal. Not to mention, yeah, I got 148,000 over there on my friend. So that being said, the tier set, the 2-piece tier bonus is going to make your Dream Breath stronger, but it's also going to make Spirit Bloom have a heal over time effect for 40% of its healing done. So if you healed for that 140,000, 40% of that will turn into a heal over time over 8 seconds. It's incredible, super bonus value, and I think it's going to be a really fun tier set to play with. And then we have Dream Breath, which, like Flame Breath, is a heal over time that has an upfront heal that is more potent depending on how long you charge it. In this instance, level 1 charges are kind of nice. because they do a lot of healing for you, and it's incredible value, especially when combo with something like Temporal Anomaly. But you can also use it to do a chunkier upfront heal when needed on the fly by simply holding it down and charging it further. The difference between Spirit Bloom and Dream Breath is they're both 30-second cooldowns, and one is a 10-second cooldown with our talent choices. However, Spirit Bloom's better for healing up large portions of damage incredibly quickly, whereas Dream Breath is both okay at healing up large portions of damage quickly, but can also be used to heal afterwards and cover any more lingering damage. It's going to be up to the player to decide what style of heal they want, but you're going to be using them not usually at the same time unless it's a really big heal mechanic. You're going to be staggering them. So maybe for one pull, you know, you're using Spirit Bloom for a big heal that you have to do, and then on the next big heal you use Dream Breath, and you can usually swap between the two as time moves on. Time Dilation gives a target the Brewmaster Monk Stagger, causing 50% of damage they would have normally taken instead to be dealt over 10.4 seconds. So this turns basically any player into a tank, and you'll also know if they do take damage, they'll end up receiving the stagger symbol that that Brewmasters get as well. It's OGCD, it's only 1 minute, and it's also a defensive that can be used on anyone. So you can use it on you can use it on a teammate. This is especially helpful with hunters and shamans who don't have that many defensives. They might need help surviving a mechanic when they don't have anything up, and so you can throw this on them to save their life. Emerald Blossom is a 3 essence heal that takes a second before it pops, but then will heal 3 targets. It's not particularly strong without the Ouroboros talent or the talent that makes it heal up to 5 players, but it is a good fire and forget. Sometimes during an essence burst, I'll use this to quickly heal the front line because you can heal while moving, but honestly, I don't find it to be particularly useful in its current state, and even with Ouroboros, I tend to forget about it and use my other buttons. Still, there are some niche scenarios where it's useful, and again, it doesn't have a cast time, so you can simply fire it while moving, which makes it pretty useful. Before we talk about Temporal Anomaly, I want to go back over Echo for anyone who missed it. Echo will replicate a healing on a target for 105% based on the way we're talented. So this means if I Living Flame myself, that target will receive a 105% version of that Living Flame. That being said, you can do some incredible amounts of heals with this or heal over time effects, right? Using a Dream Breath on this target gives them 2 instances of healing 5,000 and 6,000 and 6,000 essentially at one moment. So this is an incredible effect you can put on people. With standard echoes, you can also do what's called a cleave heal, where you give 2 targets an echo, and then you heal the 3rd target, or maybe one of the 2 targets that you already echoed, and then you heal all 3 of them. It's very time efficient, it's very useful, you will get a lot of value out of this move, but now let's talk about one of my favorite effects in the game, Temporal Anomaly. Temporal Anomaly is a shield that you can toss, it moves super quick, passes through targets, and will give a diminishing shield after 5 targets. However, it also delivers echoes at half potency, which means if you heal yourself at this point, you'll actually end up healing most, if not your entire party, with one spell. You can probably see where this is going, but you can use Temporal Anomaly to, say, do something huge like a gigantic Spirit Bloom, and now you're healing everyone for a Spirit Bloom and then an additional Spirit Bloom. Incredibly powerful stuff. You use it to heal through some big mechanics or set up some big heal over times, I like to call them blankets, to help a player or the group get through a mechanic. Temporal Anomaly, you're going to want to keep it close. It's one of your most important buttons. Now, this is a damage and a healing button, but I want to talk about it in the healing section. Tip the Scales is a 2-minute cooldown that's OGCD that makes any of your breath spells powered up fully and instant cast. This is incredibly useful. However, it's very important to note that it will max out the spell. So if you wanted Dream Breath heal over time effect, Tip the Scales isn't going to be very useful for it. That being said, I like to think of Tip the Scales as an emergency cooldown for healing. Use it when the going gets rough. You could Tip the Scales Spirit Bloom and heal everyone up in the blink of an eye. However, it is fun to use as a damage button as well, but that's a little more advanced. So when you're more comfortable with the class, feel free to use it for a nice quick instant fire breath or something. You'll get a lot of damage out of it as well. Verdant Embrace is a jump. It's got a 30-yard range and it has a 15-second cooldown that can be lowered with haste. This lets you jump to the target and heal them for a large portion, also granting them life bind for a few seconds, which is important for one of the biggest healing combos. More on that later. But it being such a short cooldown, I end up using this to cleave heal a couple of players up to full. So go back to that scenario where I echo 2 players, Verdant the 3rd, and you get a pretty big instant heal on them without having to wait for a Living Flame to cast or anything like that. It also doubles as a movement ability, so if you just need to use it to move, sometimes using it to jump to a teammate to reposition. All right, before we get to emergency cooldowns, let's talk about our dispels. Our standard dispel is Naturalize, an 8-second cooldown that's just magical effects and poison effects. Doesn't sound too fancy. It sucks to not have disease or curse in there as well, but that's why we have Cauterizing Flame. This is a 1-minute cooldown dispel that heals when you clear an effect, but it does bleeds, poisons, curses, and disease. So while it doesn't do magical effects, it does clear some bleeds, which is awesome, and it doesn't incur a cooldown when used. So you can actually combo this with Stasis to do a really large decurse on a party. However, you do have to set this up correctly, and it's a bit niche. I'll be talking about Stasis in a moment. But between these two dispels, you can cover a lot of problems. But no, if you're going to somewhere, say like Brackenhide, where there might be a lot of diseases, you're still going to want to bring a disease dispel because you're only going to be clearing one a minute as opposed to clearing one every 8 seconds. So that's something you need to think about. On to emergencies. So Stasis is sort of a halfway emergency button. It's a 1.5-minute cooldown, and when you pop it, it doesn't actually go on cooldown. Instead, you now can charge 3 moves into your Stasis. They're healing spells, and you can't put emergency spells in, but now I have a Temporal Anomaly saved. And let's put in a full Spirit Bloom. And then I could even wait for another Temporal Anomaly and then put that in. But I could also put my Dream Breath in right now if I was feeling lazy. Do note, Reversions and Living Flames will also get stored in here, so you have to be careful about what buttons you want to press. A Verdant Embrace isn't necessarily a bad idea, but let's start a Temporal Anomaly. Now, we have 30 seconds to unleash the Stasis. You can press the button again to unleash the Stasis, or you can actually click off the buff and it'll let it rip as well. That's very useful in PvP, by the way, if you're ever stunned. When you release it, all the moves will be remembered as you cast them and will be stored out, so it'll remember charge levels. Stasis is a very important button, but it can be a bit hard to get used to. My honest advice to you is use it during a big healing mechanic where you're going to press like Spirit Bloom, Temporal Anomaly, and you're going to press Dream Breath, and then you have a Stasis stored, and then when the next time there's damage, you can press Stasis instead of pressing your other buttons, and that's a good way to start using it. It's definitely a little tricky to get used to, so give it some time and it'll start making sense. Use it often infrequent at low levels because you have plenty of other buttons to cover you when crap hits the fan, but Stasis is a bit of a bread and butter for making it through major healing scenarios at higher level play. Our next emergency cooldown is Emerald Communion. It's a 3-minute cooldown. It heals us back for 20% of our maximum health and 2% of our mana for every 0.8 seconds for 4 seconds. Overhealing is transferred to an injured ally within 40 yards. So if you're at full health, this will just heal other people instead of you. However, while this is useful, it does plant you completely still while it's working, and it can be used while stunned, disoriented, incapacitated, and silenced, which is pretty neat. The only issue with Emerald Communion is again that you can't move. However, if you cast Hover before you use the move, you can use it while moving. There is a talent that does this as well, but because you can use Hover, you should just take Rush of Vitality if you end up talenting over into the side of the tree. Emerald Communion has a much more important use, and that's the Lifebind combo. The talent Lifebind shares 40% of your healing to other targets who have it. So if you echo up a couple targets or throw a Temporal Anomaly, you can use Verdant Embrace to give them a Lifebind. The Lifebind will be weaker if it's from a Temporal Anomaly, but this combo got nerfed. It was so broken, and I'll show you it right now. It's still kind of a disgusting emergency heal when you set it up. So using it in a pinch is fine, but also feel free to use it as a method of a gigantic heal that you could plan out for a major dungeon mechanic. Zephyr. So I wouldn't call this a healing cooldown, and no, it's on the Evoker tree, not the Preservation tree. So if you ever play DPS, you can bring it as well. But Zephyr is a 2-minute cooldown that speeds everyone up by 30% and reduces their AoE damage taken by 20%. That is 20% avoidance for 8 seconds. This is amazing. It's an absolutely incredible cooldown, and it works on everything that's a swirly, a circle around a player, or room-wide effects that hit everybody in the area. I cannot tell you how many times Zephyr has saved my buns in dungeons. You're gonna love this move. Have it handy. Speaking of handy moves, Rewind. So the tooltip for this one's a bit confusing. It normally heals 50% of recently taken damage in the last 5 seconds by all players. So anyone within a 40-yard range, if they've taken damage, 50% of it will be healed back. However, when you're in Mythic Plus, or rather when you're not in Raid, that doubles. So you get 100% more, which means 100% of damage taken is healed back, which makes it an incredible 4-minute cooldown. However, we run a talent that makes it 2 charges at 50% of damage taken, which is 25% in our raid, so don't worry about that number. The double rewind charge means, yeah, you get one every 4 minutes, which is sometimes incredibly useful to have charges and not run out of a button, but it does an absolutely absurd amount of healing and it's instant cast. And just look at what it does to the training dummies. It also heals over time, over a couple of ticks. So not very useful to instantly heal, but over the course of maybe a GCD and a half or 2, you will have the whole party healed. So you can use that time during rewind to say, start a temporal anomaly and get some other big heal ready so that you can heal through a gigantic mechanic. It'll save your butt. Rewind is an excellent move, but remember that 4-minute cooldown is harsh. I run double charge almost specifically because in pugs, you will get parties that fall apart over a healing mechanic getting dropped or somebody doing something stupid, and double rewind has allowed me to survive some absolute garbage of player mistakes, healer mistakes, you name it. Rewind's probably covered it. Fantastic move. Keep it in arm's reach. Okay, now onto some of the more utility sides of the kit now that we've covered all things healing. Well, actually, I guess there's one more healing one. It's Visage form. Visage will provide an out of combat heal. I personally don't like using my Visage because the fantasy of being a dragon is just so much cooler than anything else. But if you take some damage, it won't heal now, but it will heal the moment I'm out of combat. And right now at 420 item level, it's healing for 8,800. It's good, like it works, but I don't find this useful enough to swap forms. And to be honest, it's not going to really impact a whole lot in a dungeon. So use this if you want to be really efficient with your healing, but if you're like me and you like your fantasy of being a dragon, then I highly recommend you don't worry about it. Okay, on the utility side of things, let's start with Tail Swipe and Wing Buffet, or as you're going to hear me refer to as Wing Buffet. Tail Swipe is a knock-up, while Wing Buffet is a knock-back. They're both on a 1.5-minute cooldowns, but there is a talent that will let you set them to a 45-second cooldown. You just have to choose whether it's Wing Buffet or Tail Swipe. I use Wing Buffet during Sanguine weeks when I want to get the mobs out of the Sanguine. However, when you don't want to mess up players' positional attacks, Tail Swipe is generally the better call. We also have access to Landslide, which is just a root and it lasts for 30 seconds, but damage will cancel the effect. So it can interrupt movement, it can slow somebody for a brief moment, but outside of mechanics where you want to prevent a monster from touching someone, Landslide is sort of not used very often, but it's niche, it has its place. Hover is a very important move. Hover has 2 versions, a dashing version and a standing version. Just note that there's no difference between dash and stand in terms of how long it takes before you act, both of which are half GCDs and you can act a moment later. If you press hover, you'll have access to being able to cast while moving. You can't use empowered spells like Fire Breath and Dream Breath during this, but you can use all the other moves that you would channel. You can use it while moving in any of the cardinal and intercardinal directions to get a dash out of the move, and that can be a very nice movement skill to get you out of harm's way. However, one of the most useful uses of this move is to do it while standing. If you press the move while standing completely still, you don't dash, and so sometimes you're running away from a mechanic and you don't want to dash so you don't like fall off the map or something like that. You can just let go of movement, press hover, and then return to moving, and you'll just do it in place. Nice little trick, helps me out a lot. Okay, so Rescue. Rescue is an interesting button. I don't run it in Mythic Plus very often, but when I do, it's either because I have a coordinated group and we're using it for a skip, or I'm using it to save someone's life. It also doesn't interrupt channels as far as I know. So a player can be mid-cast and you can rescue them and it won't interrupt what they're doing, which is fantastic. If you do take rescue in dungeon, and this was a joke in my first video, but it is actually the way I use it now. Let's say there's a player that's off in Narnia, like a hunter or a mage that's just on the other side of the room, and you need them to be in front of you for healing because we have limited range and we have frontal heals that require them to be in a cone. I sometimes use hover just to reposition them. It can seem a little rude or toxic, but what I have found is I rescue a player and then they typically listen, or they behave, or they realize, oh, I wasn't in position, the evoker needs me here. I haven't had too many people complain about it either, so feel free to use rescue to move players into position. For our defensives, we have Obsidian Scales. It's a 1.5-minute cooldown, but we get 2 charges of it. It's a 30% DR and it lasts 12 seconds. enough said, pretty strong, does a good job. Now, it is a 1.5 minutes though, so let's say you need a lot of defensives in a boss fight. You could say use Obsidian Scales to get it on cooldown, then you could time dilate yourself, and then you could go back to using Obsidian Scales. Or if it's AoE damage, you can actually Obsidian Scale, then use Zephyr, then use time dilation, and then use your next charge of Obsidian Scales if you can really afford it. So good defensive, slightly long cooldown, but we have ways around it. Also in the utility department, we have Renewing Blaze, a 1.5 minute cooldown that just heals you. For 8 seconds, any damage that you take is 100% healed back over 8 seconds. Renewing Blaze plus a defensive is a great way to survive a mechanic and also help you worry more about healing other people than yourself. Even if we don't stat into mastery, our mastery stat is still providing us extra healing because our health is greater than their health bar. So this is a good way to use your mastery, even if we're not really statting for it. We also have access to a kick. It's a basic 40-second cooldown kick, which kind of sucks because that's a really long time to be waiting for your kick to come back up, but it's ranged, it does its job, you take it as a healer whenever you can. Enough said. Oppressing Roar, on the other hand, is a 2-minute cooldown that increases crowd control effects by 50%. So let's say you have a paladin with their 5-second stun, and you Oppressing Roar an enemy, and then your paladin buddy drops a hammer on them. Instead of being 5 seconds, it'll now be 7.5 seconds. This does work incredibly well with your Terror of the Skies, making your Deep Breath a 3-second stun. It'll be a much longer stun, and honestly, it's really worth using. I think Oppressing Roar and Terror of the Skies is a great combo, but this is more for coordinated groups. In earlier keys, you can probably ignore this talent and go for Protracted Talons or anything else that you want. However, Overawe turns it into a de-enrage as well, and every target de-enraged reduces the cooldown of the move by 20 seconds. So you can take this 2-minute cooldown and completely refund it. You might be thinking to yourself, well, are enrages that common? I've found a few in Season 2 so far. So the one of which that's, I think, the most important to tell you is in Brackenhide Hollow, there's a gnoll that's a warrior that uses a Blade Storm, and it's actually an enrage effect, and the enrage affects everything nearby as well, and you can just yell at them and then they'll stop spinning, but it'll only reduce the cooldown by 20 seconds. So you have to decide if this is worth it. In later keys, it's 100% worth it. In easier early keys, you can probably get rid of things like Oppressing Roar and Overawe. Just be prepared to put them back on your bars again at some point. We also have access to Bloodlust, or Hero if you play Alliance. It increases haste by 30% for all party members and raid members for 40 seconds. It's a 5-minute cooldown, but you can't gain the benefit of Bloodlust for 10 minutes after using it. You've probably received this move if you've played World of Warcraft before. This is straight up going to get you picked for dungeons. There are dungeons where teams really want to lust, and the only person that can provide it is a healer, and so now you can provide it as a healer. The Blessing of Bronze is a global that'll hit everyone in your party and raid with a buff that makes essentially the cooldown of their major movement ability reduced by 15%. So for Hover, this sets it at a nice 30-second recharge. For other characters, it'll depend on what move it is, but this is great. It's free value. Make sure to give it out at the start of every dungeon or raid, or after anyone dies. Now, there's a few moves in here that you don't necessarily take in Mythic Plus, and I just want to go over them. One of which is Sleepwalk. This is mostly a PvP talent, but for the new affix Incorporeal, I believe it's called, this will actually shut down one of those mobs when they're starting to cast their big bad spell. So you might need to talent into Sleepwalk on those weeks. I don't tend to use Unravel. I haven't found much of a use case for it, but it is a neat move. However, one move you will use in Raid is Time Spiral. This is just going to give everyone a free cast of one of their movement spells. It won't waste a charge or anything like that. So if you have 2 charges of Hover and you hit Time Spiral, you'll suddenly have a third for a few seconds and you can cast it. It even works if a move's on cooldown. I have not found a place in Mythic Plus where this is useful. However, this is generally called for in Raid. So also, you might be thinking Source of Magic sounds nice, but you can't put it on yourself. You can give it to any other healer, but you're the healer, so you can't actually restore your own mana with this. Dreamflight is a disgustingly good raid heal, as is an uncapped AoE heal that's direct and then over time. It's a really nice move. It also removes root effects, much like Deep Breath does, but in dungeons, I don't think the value is worth it for the 2-minute cooldown. You can get more out of other buttons, but it is a very cool button, and if you want to play around with it at low levels, there's no harm in that. It's very fun. Okay, so the tier set, the 2-piece is going to give us a better Drain Breath just by 15% and 40% of the healing from Spirit Bloom is converted into a heal over time. So it still does its full potency heal, but then in addition, 40% of that number that you hit turns into a heal over 8 seconds. This is incredibly powerful. It's not really going to change the way you play, it's just going to make everything you do better. And you actually might be able to hold off on healing after using Spirit Bloom, letting it cover a mechanic for a little bit. The 4-piece bonus is after using 4 empowered spells, so your Flame Breath, your Spirit Bloom, and your Dream Breath. After 4 uses of them, it's going to give you an Essence Rush, which will be 1 immediate Essence Burst, and then a few more seconds, another Essence Burst. It's a neat ability, and I think it's going to be more useful in Raid, but you can track it to use it more tactically, and it might line up well in the middle of a dungeon. However, do note, it doesn't store any of this in stasis. So it's not like you can use stasis to kind of prepare a rush and then use that during a major healing mechanic, unfortunately. The tier set, thankfully, isn't going to change the way you play. Our Season 1 tier set did change the way we play. However, for Season 2, it's just going to make your healing better. Essence Rush has more of a setup and a purpose in Raid. It'll just be a nice boon for us in Mythic Plus, and I honestly will not be worrying about it very much. Okay, I want to talk about the talent page, but so this video doesn't end up being hours, I do ask that you read through the talents that we take and figure out, for the most part, what these moves are. But I do want to talk about key talents so that you know why I'm building the way I am. Beginners, there is a beginner talent page that I will set up for you down below. It'll have a very, very chill left side, and I'll go over its right side talents in a moment. But for all of you who are wondering, we go this route so we can get our kick, some damage increases, let our fire breath last a little bit longer, and then we can talent into Oppressing Roar or Protracted Talons. Leaping Flames is a super useful talent. The more you charge up your flame breath, you'll get a leaping flame, so your living flame will split into like 5, and then it'll either hit all enemies or all allies depending on what you clicked on. So if you fire a leaping flame on an enemy, it'll seek enemies first. If you hit it on an ally, it'll seek allies first. You will go Terror of the Skies at some point. This is a nice combo with Oppressing Roar, but it really depends on the week, the group you're playing with, etc. Don't feel like you have to do everything on Preservation Evoker, but sometimes it does feel like you need to. Terror of the Skies is a great talent. We do take extra health when the dungeons get rough. Trust me, when I was attempting 24s in Pugs, this had saved my butt more times than a few. So this is somewhere I draw from for more points in my talent tree, but Draconic Legacy does a lot of work for keeping you alive. I also grab Hover, 1 extra charge, and extra hover duration, because Hover is an incredibly useful ability, and I often need to stay on my feet, especially during mechanics. However, I don't tend to take Rescue just because I don't really need it all the time, and I don't mind yelling in the chat to tell someone to get in position because they're ranging me. However, it is fine to take Rescue in dungeons, so feel free to go for that. There's also this talent here, Fire Within, that makes Renewing Blaze a 1 minute. If you ever feel like you need more self-healing during a damage mechanic so you can focus on your teammates a bit more, it's not a bad one to talent into, but it's one of the first places I reduce a point from, because typically speaking, I use Renewing Blaze when it's needed, and then I don't typically need it again, unless again, of course, it's a really bad mechanic. We go this way just to get the extra defensive, because having 2 is a lot better than having 1. This increases Living Flames damage and healing. Enough said about that. Scarlet Adaptation, on the other hand, is very fun. So essentially, you store a portion of your healing that gets done up to a value, and then your next damaging Living Flame will consume all of it to do more damage. This is a nice bonus to your damage you don't have to think about. It kind of lets you catch up, if you will, on your DPS when you've been healing for a little bit. But it also works with all of your passive healing, so you can have healing going out over time on players, and you'll just be doing a little bit more on every Living Flame. It's a very nice talent. Here's where Cauterizing Flame is, and then we take this because all of your healing done and healing received are increased by 4%. Pretty strong stuff. This is where the Emerald Blossom talent is, again, if you want to run a more Emerald Blossom based build, and here's where Sleepwalk is, again, for certain affixes. On this side of the talent tree, we always tend to take all the way through here. In terms of abilities, I'll start with the left side. Emerald Communion's right here. That's an absolute must for an emergency heal. Spiritual Clarity just reduces the cooldown of Spirit Bloom. I'm probably going to run this for all of Season 2, but in Season 1 I started running it because there were enough mechanics that I wanted to cover with Spirit Bloom, where 30 seconds was too far apart for the cooldown, and 20 seconds allowed me to use it back to back. So I'm going to keep this talent around unless I feel incredibly comfortable in the dungeons with healing. On this side of things, Life Giver's Flame is what allows our Fire Breath to do damage and heal for it, which is fantastic value. You want to keep this talent around. And Life Force Mender, which is just going to make your Living Flame and Fire Breath do more damage based on your maximum health. This is only getting stronger as the expansion goes on, so keep your eye on this talent. Lifebind is the talent that allows Verdant Embrace to share healing with an ally. This is what allows you to do the big Emerald Communion combo, and it is such a good combo, it is worth a single talent point, so keep this one around. Golden Hour is what makes our Reversion a good spot heal. Time Lord is what makes our Echo so much stronger in single target and on Temporal Anomaly. This is where Temporal Anomaly is, and Resonating Sphere is what allows us to apply Echo to everyone, and it maths out to about 45% with Time Lord maxed out. Down here, there's a couple of talents that I play around with, so you need to know that I do swap these around quite a bit at high level play. Energy Loop is our method of getting mana back. Please run this, it'll make your life a lot easier. Anyone who tells me there's no such thing as mana problems on Preservation hasn't healed to 24, so I think this is worth grabbing basically all the time so that you're used to using it by the time you do run into mana problems. This is where Erasure is, my double rewind charge. Again, it's a standard for pugs, makes life a lot easier. Font of Magic is optional. I like it for the damage and healing output, but it just makes you have an extra empower level on your spells. This is very useful, but you can give it up if you want to run more utility or you want to rely on other heals a bit more. In fact, I sometimes run it like this just because I don't feel like I need Font of Magic, but I really do want a full Grace Period. Grace Period is a talent that increases the healing on the target by 10%, doubles if you have 2 reversions on a target, and I typically use this during Temporal Anomaly. I'll throw it out, I'll give everyone in the party a Grace Period with a reversion, and then as damage comes through, I'll spot heal them and they'll take extra healing because of this talent. It's very useful and actually gets a ton of value out of Life Giver's Flame. So I like to keep this one around quite a bit because the synergy it provides with Life Giver's Flame is huge. Time of Need is the coolest RP talent in the game, like canonically. A version of yourself enters your timeline and heals your target for blah, and then it continues to heal them for 8 seconds before returning. All that needs to happen is you or a teammate need to fall below 20% health. It can happen once every 60 seconds. This talent, so you might be thinking, well, that's kind of a low value of healing. How much is the healing them for 8 seconds? Honestly, they come out with a base Verdant Embrace and then they use Living Flame. It's not a crazy big heal, but what it is somebody healing someone without you having to do a thing. So having someone else provide healing while you're providing healing is such an insane value. You might find that this saves your butt in dungeons time and time again, with pugs especially. This is in fact my #1 pugging talent, as this is what keeps people alive more often than not when they make a mistake. At higher levels of play, players tend to just die, so Time of Need isn't always as useful at high levels, but I have it in my talent tree because I pug a lot, and let me tell you, 10 out of 10, I recommend Time of Need. It's a fun button, or it's not even a button, it's a passive, but it's a fun passive to have around, and I think you'll enjoy it. Stasis is, again, our wonderful emergency heal. It's basically mandatory in Mythic Plus, so make sure you get used to this one. The fun talents you might want to play around with are Flow State, which after using an empowered spell, you just kind of increase time by 10% when it's maxed out. And yeah, it's as good as it sounds. Your movement speed, your cooldown recharge rate, and your cast speed is all reduced 10%. It's awesome, it feels great, but you don't always have the talent points to be running this, so it might not always feel good. Or rather, it always feels good to use, but it's not always worth the talent points. But if you're doing a low key and you don't mind getting rid of, like, say, your grace period for it, you can have a lot of fun with this. Optionally, another thing you'll see in this build is this. This is the Call of Ysera setup. Call of Ysera means when you use Verdant Embrace, your Dream Breath becomes powerful. I like this talent, but I don't use it because I don't need to rely on Dream Breath having extra healing to do a lot of what I do. Although this is a very safe way to play while you're leveling, as it will provide a lot of healing. And then for all of you beginners out there, the beginner build actually looks a little bit like this, where instead of going to Call of Ysera, we just go down to Renewing Breath. Ouroboros will power up your Emerald Blossom after using Echo, but you can kind of forget about this skill and just throw out Emerald Blossoms and they'll occasionally be stronger, and it's kind of significant. Even just one 30% stack is a lot, but we do it because this just makes Dream Breath 30% stronger. So it's not the 40% from Call of Ysera, but you don't have to do anything for it. So for newer players, this is less to remember, and it'll just make one of your most powerful heals even more powerful, which makes it good at helping covering large portions of damage when you're not sure how to heal people up to full. those are the builds that I run. Again, there are other variations and whatnot that you might find useful. I honestly recommend that you play around with it. And of course, play to the party or the dungeon you're in. Maybe you run less CC abilities if your party's got plenty of crowd control and your homies got your back. Maybe you can run a little more dangerously with flow state because you run with like a feral druid and a shadow priest that both have off healing cooldowns. The list goes on. This is what I recommend and what I run with, but I do make adjustments to this list. So play around with it and have fun with it. Okay, so before we talk about healing and combos, let's talk about our damage rotation. It's pretty easy. And again, if you take Protracted Talons, you're going to want to use Azure Strike in 3 targets, but otherwise use Living Flame. And 3 targets or more, I should say. But we're not going to be going over that. We're going to be going over the basic rotation because this is what I do in every single dungeon. At the start of a pull, I throw a Temporal Anomaly. Don't worry about that. That's part of the healing rotation. Then a Fire Breath level 1 or Accommodate. If the pack won't live long enough, you can charge it up longer. Then I use the Disintegrate generally to get some of my mana back, throw a Living Flame to throw my Leaping Flame, and then throw Living Flames. And I'm not kidding, that's the end of it. You just throw Living Flames. Use Deep Breath off cooldown, so maybe you have a free moment, time to use Deep Breath. Okay, and now go back to casting Living Flame. And that's it. It's real simple. Put a Disintegrate in there whenever you want to mix things up or whatever, but it's a pretty simple job. The Fire Breath will do its job in healing targets, helping them out, and of course, will do a decent amount of damage to the party. It's very simple. It's nowhere near as complicated as something like Discipline Priest or even Holy Priest or Mistweaver, or Holy Paladin, excuse me, Mistweaver. Oh, not Holy Priest. That's it. Not a lot to talk about there. It's honest to God that easy. So if you just drop a Fire Breath and throw Living Flames, I'll be happy. So combos are pretty easy. I have a bunch of basic combos that will help with our basic healing rotation. But before we get into that, I just want to go over it in case you missed it earlier. Echo will replicate a heal on a target. So you give a target an Echo and they'll get 105% of the healing. If it's Temporal Anomaly that you threw, you're going to get a reduced version of this mechanic at 45%, which is still pretty worth it. Now, it'll replicate any heal. So throw a Living Flame, throw a Reversion or a Verdant Embrace, and you'll get exactly what you think out of it. You'll get multiple people healed. Echoes are good for healing one target or cleave targets to heal multiple people at the same time with one spell. Temporal Anomaly is good for healing an entire group of players. Maybe say, giving people a massive Dream Breath, and that way everyone in your party gets this nice fat Dream Breath heal. For new players, it might seem intimidating, combos and all these cooldowns, but all I want you to know is Temporal Anomaly and Echo give you bigger versions of your heals, and just simply work through your cooldowns. Use your cooldowns before you have to use things like Living Flame. Your opener goes as following. Throw a Temporal Anomaly through as many teammates as possible, use Echo on anyone who didn't get it, and then use a Fire Breath level 1 or whatever you need to kickstart your healing. Then from there, it's all about how much damage they're taking. I use Reversion when there's not a lot of damage coming in. That way, everyone has grace period on them and will benefit more from the Fire Breath healing and from any other spot healing that I need to do on them. But if the group's about to take a ton of damage, you can use Spirit Bloom instead to heal back that large portion of damage. If there's some damage coming in and you want a little bit of help healing through it, Dream Breath level 1 will allow you to set up a big enough heal over time to supplement any other kind of healing that you're doing, that it should help you top off the party pretty quickly. You can use Living Flame with a Temporal Anomaly as a budget heal. It's not the best version of this combo, but if you don't want to use your cooldowns because there's a major mechanic coming up, this is a great way to save. And use Stasis on any sort of opening combo if you think within the next 30 seconds there will be another big round of damage that you're going to want to heal through. Now, what makes this class hard to heal on the advanced side of healing is that you need to know some of the combos, just so that you can decide what's the best way of handling certain types of damages. So, you've already heard me talk about it this whole video, but the classic is Echo Reversion. Put an Echo on someone, reversion them, especially after they've recently taken damage. This is a good way to heal them back up. This is especially good on tanks, so if you see a tank's health bar going up and down a bunch, it doesn't matter if they healed recently or anything, it'll still work if it was in the last 5 seconds. Also, Echo Echo, 2 Echoes, and then any other heal is a great way to do cleave healing. You already heard it in the opener, but Temporal Anomaly into Dream Breaths, Spirit Blooms, Reversions, and Living Flame are again very useful combos, but it's going to depend on what the damage profile is, depending on which one of those is better. Your largest combo is the Emerald Communion combo, and this one is worth learning. Throw a Temporal Anomaly, then use Verdant Embrace to give everyone Life Bind, and then hit Emerald Communion as quick as possible to heal everyone for a massive amount through the Emerald Communion. This is such a big heal that it actually got nerfed, and it's still sort of one of the best heals in the game. So you're gonna wanna know that one. It's a great use of Emerald Communion if you have the time to set it up. Another one is Rewind into Ramp. Hit Rewind and then use the time during its healing pulses to throw out a Temporal Anomaly and then use another big heal to finish topping off players through a large segment of damage. If you have the time or you don't need the Fire Breath healing, charge up your Fire Breath, then throw a Temporal Anomaly, and then throw a Living Flame. You'll get Leaping Flames. It'll do a significantly larger amount of healing because of Leaping Flames. So this is sort of a bonus budget version of a Temporal Anomaly heal. So the advanced healing rotation on this class is nothing more than knowing what kind of damage you're taking and using the right cooldowns. At low level play, it doesn't really matter if you mess it up. You could throw a Temporal Anomaly and then Dream Breath everyone level 1, and then all of a sudden you need more healing, and then you're panicking and pressing other buttons, and that's okay. It's probably not the end of the world at low level keys. In high level keys, you typically plan it out based on what you know is about to happen to the party. If I know there might be some sporadic targeted damage, I might start with a Dream Breath just to get everyone healing over time so that I can catch back up a little bit quicker if they do take damage, hopefully getting them above the point where they will die if they get targeted again. But it's a class that really requires you planning things out. So until you know where things go, it's okay to experiment. The key level shouldn't be so difficult that you can't experiment early on. So take some time and have some fun with it. Preservation Evoker is my favorite class in the game. I love the power fantasy of it. I love the moves it provides, and it rewards you handsomely for thinking ahead of time and putting a combo together and keeping your party alive. It's got good damage, good healing, and a lot of great utility on it. It can struggle when you fall behind and if you run out of cooldowns, but keep your wits about you and be comfortable using your cooldowns, and in no time you'll have this class learned and we'll be on with it. It's definitely a bit tricky for beginners, but stick with it. I promise you it will click, and it's pretty freeform. So there are a lot of ways to solve problems that aren't necessarily wrong. Maybe they're not optimal, but they got the job done and you can continue healing like nothing happened. So that's going to do it for the video. If you made it this far, hey, get subscribed. It would mean so much to me. And I will see you all next time for plenty more healing guides and Mythic Plus stuff. Take care, friends. I will see you all soon.